going on, Intellects? It's your boy, the Fiscal Intellect here. And today we're going to be reacting to the Karmelo Anthony and the Austin Metcalf murder trial. What evidence the prosecution team had presented, and also the rebuttals the defense team had as well too. The defense team has not had the chance to rest its case thus far. So right now we're going to be reviewing what the prosecution team had laid out and had rested for us, and the jury as well too. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be watching Law and Crime Network. Pretty great, reputable people when it comes to lawsuits, cases, trials, things of that nature.
Hanging in the balance, his attorneys are now trying to reshape the narrative jurors have heard for days, offering a version of events that could determine whether he walks free or this teen spends years, if not the rest of his life, behind bars. But looming over the defense is a question that has haunted this trial from the very beginning. Why did Karmelo Anthony have a knife at a high school track meet that day? After days of testimony from prosecution witnesses, the defense called Anthony's track coach as its—
I want to let you guys know that him having that knife there was not illegal. It might have been against school policies and rules and regulations, but in the state of Texas, him having that knife there that was not categorized as a weapon that needed to stay stationary or something that was above 5.5 inches. It was below 5.5 inches. So he's able to carry it on his person. Now, him carrying it on his person on school property might have been against school rules, but it wasn't inherently illegal according to the state of Texas.
First witness, and from the moment he took the stand, jurors heard a different account of what happened in the moments leading up to the deadly confrontation. All right, before we jump into Karmelo Anthony's side of the story, I want to get with Court TV's Cody Thomas inside the courtroom once again today. Cody, let's talk about how the state finished their case. And they call a witness today who's kind of the link between Karmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf. He was teammates with Austin Metcalf, knew Karmelo Anthony to some extent. His name is Eddie. Why was his testimony important?
So we've heard this Eddie character's name, Chris, throughout the entire duration of all the student witnesses that have taken the stand. He is the common denominator. We heard a lot of people saying Karmelo knew Eddie. He came over and dapped Eddie up, gave him a handshake. Eddie was a childhood friend of Karmelo's now ex-girlfriend. So that's the connection there. Now, based on all the testimony that the students brought up during the prosecution's case, they were all saying that Eddie and Karmelo looked like they knew each other. It was the obvious link. That's what the defense kind of talked about in their opening statements. Of course, some people under the tent said they didn't know who Karmelo was, but they looked over, he was sitting next to Eddie. Everything came back to this guy named Eddie. All right. So I was thinking, as I've been sitting there for the past few days, that Eddie was going to be a defense witness, because if he's great friends with Karmelo, then obviously, he'd fend for his friend, I would say. But one thing I was thinking before he got called was, if he knew Karmelo, why wouldn't he stand up and let everybody know, when all the commotion started, hey, this is my friend, he's here with me, blah, blah, blah. Everything's cool. But never heard that from any of the students' testimony. But anyway, Eddie gets on the stand today. They're going through his testimony. He's about 5 or 10 minutes in. And then Eddie kind of all but says he knew who Karmelo was. They were cool, but he verbally said, I wouldn't say we were friends. It was just kind of someone that he knew. Okay, cool. Now we move on to the cross-examination by the defense. And this is, I feel, was a little bit of a win for the defense. They showed a whole bunch of pictures of Eddie and Karmelo at these different group settings, at Eddie's house, no less. There was 50th birthday parties for Karmelo's ex-girlfriend's mother. Remember, Eddie and the girlfriend, this girl named Valeria, they were the ones that knew each other, and Karmelo was, I guess, the third party, you would say. So when they had these family functions, Karmelo obviously was there. Okay, they showed some group photos, kind of establishing. And then, here's another defense win to me today. They showed photos of Karmelo and Eddie together, just being teenagers goofing off. One is playing a guitar. They're making silly faces at the camera. So Eddie gets up there under direct examination saying, yeah, I know him, but, I wouldn't say he's a friend. But then the defense pushes back and is like, hey, if you're not friends, why do you have all these pictures together?
When it comes to murder trials, when it comes to trials in general, you're going to have a prosecution team, you're going to have a defense team. And they're both trying to play in theatrics and explaining and providing the jury their version of the story and how they perceive what happened and what transpired, which led up to whatever case is being argued against or for. And so you have to take this with a grain of salt because some of these perspectives are coming off bias. Like they have bias, pure biases, right? Because these people know Austin Metcalf and they're his friend. And also, you got to remember that Karmelo Anthony is going to have biases leaning towards his favor as well, too. Once the defense team breasts out their case, we'll be able to see that as well. You know, again, just when you pay attention to cases like this, murder trials, and other cases of this nature, the red pill, blue pill talk from certain entities and people or groups that weigh in on situations of this magnitude. You got to skip that because you become polarized if you like, oh, wait, this side is all right or this side is all wrong. You need to understand both situations and both sides and then come up with your own thoughts. Don't just watch the video and say, hey, maybe the way he's thinking or the way she's thinking or they're thinking is the way I need to be thinking. No, you need to do your own research and understand that at the end of the day, we as a people here, like us watching the video, don't have any decision on if Karmelo Anthony gets life in prison or not. It's the jury's decision. And so we just need to watch, understand what's going on and what's transpiring, and then come up with our own conclusion of what could have happened and understand that we have no power in putting Karmelo Anthony in jail or in making sure Karmelo Anthony doesn't get put in jail. We don't have no power, right? That's the power of the prosecution team and the defense team and the jury. Let's continue.
Like a brother to him. He said that on the stand. And when he was describing, you know, everything that he saw that day, when he came back and saw Austin had a hole in his chest, he immediately choked up and started crying instantly. They had to walk up there and give him Kleenex. And there were some new people in the gallery today, Chris. There were 5 young boys, presumably former teammates, former classmates of Austin Metcalf's. And when they were describing that as well, 3 of those 5 boys started crying themselves. And, you know, these are, you know, big football player-esque guys, and they were crying too, just showing the, you know, the emotional weight that this still carries. And, you know, Karmelo sitting there, he's taking it all in. I'm looking at him on his, at his table with his defense as this testimony is going on, still sitting there stoic. I don't know what's going through his head. I'm sure he's realizing the gravity of what's going down, but his defense, the state rested today. So his defense is up and they've called 3 witnesses so far, 2 students included, one of those being one of Karmelo's friends too.
Yeah, and you know, there's been a lot of time spent for both the prosecution and the defense kind of establishing like why Karmelo Anthony was under this tent, because from the state's perspective, they've hammered this like tent culture of track and field where it's like you don't go under the tent of another school. But then with this Eddie character coming into play, like the defense is really trying to show that like Karmelo may have been invited under the tent. That's why he's there. I wonder just how much any of that matters. Because I just think of like, if you're a juror, it's like, when do you enter like the bubble of the information that matters, of like the interaction when we talk about things escalating to the point where Austin Metcalf, maybe it's a hard shove, maybe it's a soft shove, that happens. And then you have Karmelo.
At the end of the day, they're not going to argue, should he have the knife on campus? And they're going to keep going back to, why did you have a knife on campus? Why did you bring a knife on campus? You come from a great family, come from a great household. You're a team captain, right? You have great grades. You have colleges looking at you. And I'm pretty sure he comes from a great neighborhood. I don't think there's a reason why you should have a knife on you if you come from a great neighborhood and there's no robberies or, you know, run-ins, you know, with thugs and gangsters and things of that nature. You having a knife on you, there has to be something that the defense needs to portray or explain to the jury to let them know, hey, or inform them, hey, this is the reason why he had this knife on him on school property. Because if you don't, the prosecution team is going to eat you alive just hitting straight on that one point.
Anthony responding with this stab wound that eventually takes Austin Metcalf's life. And that kind of leads to a witness that came, one of the final witnesses for the state today, the medical examiner who conducted the autopsy on Austin Metcalf. And before we talk about that part of it, I know you've been sitting kind of near the family of Austin Metcalf. And I know there's been body cam video, there's been 911 calls. I mean, it's just the weight of what they're going through. It's just hard to imagine. What did you see prior to that witness being called?
So, you know, the student witnesses wrap up and there was this sort of announcement. You know, all the media, as you mentioned, we're all sitting behind Austin Metcalf's family. All 9 members of the media are behind them. So Before this medical examiner comes up, there's an announcement that she's going to be the next witness, to which the prosecution turns around. If you don't want to see or hear about any of these things, I'd advise you to leave the courtroom, because now you're about to get into, the injuries and talking about them. And I was sitting there thinking we were going to see the injuries. We didn't. The jury got to see 4 pictures of it, but us in the gallery did not see those things, but they were describing it in detail. So anyway, the prosecution announces medical examiner's coming in. If you don't want to hear any of this, go out. Austin Metcalf's mom gets up and goes out immediately, along with some other family members and some people in their camp as well. His dad, Jeff Metcalf, initially said no. He nodded his head. I was sitting right behind him. He said he didn't want to leave. And then the prosecutor kind of makes a face and just goes, I advise you to leave. I could hear it was kind of a whisper. It wasn't, an announcement. It was more so a direct to him, to which Jeff Metcalf finally got up and left. And, we heard about this 2-inch gaping wound. She described gaping, and she described the difference between gaping and a slit style stabbing wound. Where gaping is more of, it's kind of like filleted open, not to be insensitive to it, but that's the way she kind of described it on the stand. And that it was a 2-inch deep wound that hit the cartilage of Austin Metcalf's sternum and actually pierced one of the ventricles in his heart. So he was literally stabbed in the heart, which is likely why the CPR and life-saving efforts weren't working, because no matter how much the heart was pumping out, it was leaking, from the source. So it was really establishing.
Just think about it. You're at a track meet with your brother and your family, your loved ones, and your friends. And I'm playing from both perspectives. And someone is there underneath your tent and you're seeing, like, hold on, what the fuck? Who are you? Can you move? Leave? Honestly, I wouldn't think that a guy would have a knife on him at a track meet. So if I push you, I would expect for you to push me back or punch me back. Now, does that mean that allows me to put my hands on you? No, not at all. I don't think that anyone should put their hands on anyone and then expect that other person not to do something about it, right? Unless you're provoked in order to do so. And even if you are provoked, I still don't think you should put your hands on anyone, because you never know the outcome, right? Example numero uno. Unfortunately, 2 young men's lives have changed forever, and their families and friends as well too have changed forever because of 2 shoves, because of a person being underneath the wrong tent. This is crazy. This kid, Austin Metcalf, doesn't have a chance to graduate, go to college, graduate college, get an internship, get a job. Then from that job, find a fiance, get married, have kids. He doesn't have the chance and opportunity to do so. And if the defense doesn't play their role right and do their job correctly, then Karmelo Anthony wouldn't have the opportunity either. So it's up to the deliberation of the jury.
The gravity of the wound, and the jury again got to see 4 pictures. 2 of them were Austin Metcalf on the autopsy table, and 2 of them were the heart removed from the body. That's what the medical examiner was describing they were seeing. So, of course, I'd imagine that a family didn't want to hear that. So mom, dad, and some other people, I don't know who they were, maybe the aunts and uncles, maybe it's just family, friends, and supporters of the Metcalf family. They all got up and left, about 7 or 8 of them.
And I wonder too, I know from the first responders who were there, the people who interacted with Karmelo Anthony right after all of this took place, where it seemed like he didn't think that what had happened was going to lead to Austin Metcalf's death. But then you hear about, the medical examiner, I think, straight up said something along the lines of, like, there's no way that he could have survived this. Even if he was on the operating table, like, a surgeon might not have been able to save him. The wound was that bad.
It absolutely was that bad. And those are the exact words that she said. And then one word that stood out to me, Chris, that she said, she starts describing the 5 manners of death, and to which she, classified this one as a homicide. And when she explained homicide to the jury, she said the intentional, bringing about of death by another human being. But the key word to that, to me, was, Chris, and I thought the prosecution would harp on a little bit, was intentional. It wasn't like accidental. It wasn't this and that. She said the intentional causing of harm that results in death by another human being. So I thought that was a powerful thing. That she said on the stand.
And you just wonder too, like, a statement like that, just that one line. And then I also know from some of these student witnesses who have just very bluntly said they don't believe that this is self-defense. We're going to talk about the defense side of things here in a moment, and kind of from Karmelo Anthony's perspective, what they're trying to say. But you just wonder, over the last couple of days, with so many people just bluntly saying that to the jury, what impact that's going to have. Now, the state ends up resting. Before we get to the defense, I know that there was a quick motion that the defense raised right as the state ended up resting. What was that about?
Yeah, the defense immediately motioned for a directed verdict. And in layman's terms, that pretty much means that the defense tells the judge, hey, I don't think the state really proved their point beyond a reasonable doubt. And if it was granted, the judge would be like, you know what, you're right, and pretty much grant this in favor of the defendant, to which there would be a not guilty and the defendant walks free. But the motion was almost immediately denied. The prosecutor said a few words, maybe 10 seconds, and then the judge looked over to the defense, Mr. Mike Howard, and said, yeah, your motion's denied. So they tried for the directed verdict before they started their case. Then we took a recess and came back in for the defense to actually start their case.
Now, when it comes to the defense's case, the first witness they called was Karmelo Anthony's coach. And so we heard from Austin Metcalf's coach on the state side. What did he say?
He was talking about, they started off humanizing this defendant here, because let's not forget, we have a victim here, but this kid's liberty is at stake as well. He's claiming this self-defense and saying that, he feared for his life, which valid if he did. So this coach gets up there and he's talking about how Karmelo was this athlete. He's on the football team, and they presented an exhibit of what they call the captain's awards at his school, to which you see Karmelo's name engraved as the captain in 2024 during his fall senior season. And they also pointed out that that is voted upon by the students, pretty much trying to show that, Karmelo Anthony is a reputable guy. He's somewhat of a leader. He looks like a leader to his classmates and his teammates. So they talked about that for a little bit, and then they got into the we've heard the tent culture. That was what a lot of this has been, that phrase has been circulating around in the courtroom, talking about each tent is like each locker room for each team. Therefore, people should not be hanging under the tents. Well, this coach was saying, I get that, but at the same time, I guess it's the discretion of each coach. Whereas we had the coach from Memorial High School, that was the absolute first witness.
Honestly, me being from Texas and playing football, running track as well too in high school, I'm not gonna lie, we never went underneath anyone else's tent. And you're not doing that down here. You're not going underneath another person's tent, especially another team tent, right? Maybe if there was a parent, they had a separate tent. If they were well off enough, they had a little separate tent with their bleachers, stadium chairs, and umbrellas and coolers with snacks and fruits and orange slices. Maybe you'll go chill with that parent and not your teammates underneath the team tent, but not with another team. But you have to understand, again, context matters. Situation, environments matter, especially when it comes to a murder trial. It was raining outside. It was not bright and sunny like it normally is here in good old Texas.
The second witness by the prosecution, talking about how, strict he is and how, he enforces his rules. And we had that several student witnesses talk about how Coach Robert Starr, that's the coach for Memorial High School, has been strict. It's garnered some laughs inside the courtroom when they talk about how strict he was. But this coach here today was saying, there was times where athletes from another school would come under my tent when I'm there and, ask if they could be there. And I was like, yeah, we'll chill out and watch the 200 meters. But what the prosecution harped on during that, when they got under cross-examination, was, he specified when you were there as a coach, as a supervising individual versus, just the teenagers running free, because this coach also specified that they like to have a coach at the tents at all times just to watch teenagers, not thinking about crimes. You got boys, you got girls, you got a lot of hormones. You want to keep everything in line with a bunch of teenagers. So, started off with, positivity for Karmelo, which obviously his side is in support of. But when it got to cross-examination, it just seemed like the prosecution was just ready for everything that this coach had to say and tried to dispute anything that was being said.
Yeah, I feel like one question that each day we kind of revisit in talking about this is like, why does Karmelo Anthony have a knife at a track meet? And I feel like to this point, like that has yet, and we'll see.
That.
They are just beginning to present their case. But even in some of the cross-examinations, like it seems like the prosecution continues to hone in on that in asking questions to whether it's a coach or a teammate of Karmelo Anthony about having this knife at a track meet.
Yeah, Chris, because that question, that's the biggest question, and it hasn't been answered. And, even with the three witnesses today, the second witness was a student and a very good friend of Karmelo's. And, it started off, I thought the defense was on a roll. I was like, all right, the defense is coming back now. This student was talking about how at different track meets, they go under tents. He sits under tents all the time. He actually specified that he sat under the memorial tent for several minutes with Karmelo because they had a common friend that was on the track team. So I was like, oh, here's some pushback. Here's, some clarity in the air about this tent culture. Everything's rolling good for the defense. And then the prosecution comes back and asks, 4 or 5 questions. One of those questions being, do you expect a knife to be at a track meet? No, sir. Should a knife be at a track meet? No, sir. Did you expect anything like this to happen? No, sir. Just all these different things addressing the knife situation, which, to the average person seems like common knowledge not to have a weapon on school grounds, no matter if it's legal or not. Just having a weapon, people can legally carry guns, but you can't have them inside a school. You know what I mean? So that's where the prosecution was going every single time the defense tried to get the ball rolling. The prosecution asked those 4 questions that the answers to those questions went in the prosecution's favor and not the defense's.
Yeah. And I wonder too, because I know, like, kind of going back to one of the state witnesses today who had mentioned that he felt like Austin was trying to intimidate Karmelo Anthony. So like eventually it gets to the point where for whatever reason he's in this tent, the members of Austin Metcalf's track team, Austin Metcalf, his twin brother, like they just don't want Karmelo Anthony there. And then they get into this like back and forth confrontation. Maybe there's swear words being sent. I know there was like some trash talk.
Whoa, swear words. This is the first time I'm ever hearing about swear words being thrown around by either party. I thought it was just 2 shoves by Austin and then a reaction by Anthony with a stab. I didn't think it was like a provocation, someone provoking someone with derogatory terms and slang terminology. I didn't think that was going on, but that's fucking crazy. Holy shit. That kind of opens up little things, right? Seems like they're both bickering at each other. If the defense can bring that in, well, the witnesses, holy shit.
To like football that might have like raised things to the next level, but it still seems like there's still this question of like, was Karmelo Anthony in a position where he needed to defend himself to the point that he pulls a knife out of a backpack?
I mean, I guess the jury would just have to see the footage because, like, if I'm Karmelo Anthony's team, I'm like, hold on. I'm with Karmelo Anthony's like, what, 5'11", right? And then they're like, wait, the twins like, what, 6'1". It's not that much of a height difference, not that much of a weight difference. But if you're pushing me and I'm on Bleacher Stadiums, I mean, I wouldn't, in the heat of the moment, no, I'm not thinking about this shit. Honestly, I'm not. You know what I'm saying? I'm not even gonna think about pulling a knife from my bag. I'm just gonna sock you in your fucking jaw. But at the end of the day, again, 17 years old when it happened. If I'm the defense team, Austin pushing my client twice could have triggered something in his mind. I might fall back and hit my head and end up bleeding out in my head. So I think I might die from this guy pushing me. It has to be that drastic. Not just him pushing me and I'm like gonna slide over. It's him pushing me and me falling back and hitting my head and possibly knocking myself unconscious and bleeding out on through brain trauma. But again, that's a far stretch, bro.
And stabs Austin Metcalf in the chest. And it just seems like we keep getting to this point and you're kind of waiting to hear that other side of the story.
That's exactly what everyone in here is waiting for. It's what I'm waiting for, Chris. I want to hear the other side of the story because everything so far from all the students, all the eyewitness accounts who were there on the scene, not talking about the coaches who were may have been scattered out, across the stadium. We're talking students who were feet away under the same tent, every last one of them. And let me just address this too, Chris. I mean, I know, the racial aspect of this is a big deal. There have been several Black and Hispanic students, probably the majority of these students have been Black or Hispanic, testifying about these different things, talking about their love for the Metcalf family and what have you. But all of these students come back saying that they didn't even expect anything to happen. They thought it was just, some trash talk, some boys, just going back at it. And everything you've seen before, may have been some profanity. Some say they don't recall profanity. Some say they did. But none of them said that they felt like anything like this was about to happen. One of them even just said they thought, okay, when Austin shoved them, maybe there would have been a shove back and, that would have been it. But every last one said everything happened so fast.
I have to comment on it. I don't think the racial aspect came from the actual witnesses being there. I think the racial aspect came from now, at least the jury, right? With the jury being all white. I think that's something that, a lot of minorities and Black people had to speak up about. Is that the jury's being all white, but what they don't speak up about is that 3 of them were Black. I believe one of them was a teacher. The prosecution team used what they could use to get them put out. But I think that's a bad move by the prosecution team. That opens up the gate for a person to ask for an appeal because it wasn't represented fairly by their peers or the community fairly. I think that's where the prosecution is going to mess up at. Again, that's something for the jury to deliberate and for the law to inform us on what the end decision is on Karmelo Anthony.
Fast, and then they didn't even realize what happened until Austin pulls his shirt up and they see a hole in his chest. So to your point, Chris, I'm waiting to hear the defense, whether maybe Karmelo Anthony will take the stand and testify about his own fears, which I would love to hear. I would love to hear both sides. That's how we get a fair trial. But right now, as of now, we haven't really heard anything that results in self-defense by lethal force. In fact, one of the students today said, the question that the prosecution has been asking towards the end, do you feel this was self-defense? Many of the students just say, no, sir. One said, no, that was lethal force versus non-lethal force, which, fair point.
Yeah, and again, like those are kind of just, if you're a juror sitting there and you hear that, how do you counter it from the defense's point of view? And I think of like, does Karmelo Anthony take the stand? And like, we may be like a good ways away from like whether or not that is going to be a possibility. But I do think like every single witness to this point who was there, who saw this, because he's under an opposing team's tent, like these are friends of Austin Metcalf who are testifying. So that is certainly a disadvantage, just frankly saying, for Karmelo Anthony and giving his side of the story. And he may be the only one who's able to give his side of the story when it comes to the defense. Before getting to the final witness of today, who I think had like an interesting perspective on things, what did you see from the jury today? Because I know yesterday, the day before, like there were some really emotional moments. You could tell that the jury was getting emotional.
Yeah, not so emotional today, Chris. They were more so focused than anything, especially during the moments they saw those autopsy photos and, Austin Metcalf's heart literally out of his body. I was looking for some kind of visceral reaction, but they just all seemed to just really, just sitting there, just looking, just nodding. They're going back and forth. They're walking up and down, the jury box, showing them these photos, explaining what they're seeing and, getting into all the medical terms and everything, which I'm sure, some of them probably received that, but most of them are probably just receiving the visuals that they're looking at. But they were just very focused today, very focused, just, really listening to what was being said in court. Sometimes I see their eyes wander to the prosecution's table. They'd wander over, look towards the other side, towards Karmelo Anthony, maybe looking for how he'd respond to any of these things. But nothing really emotional from that jury here today.
Well, and I know from, Austin Metcalf's family, like we've talked about, like his dad at times will put his hand or his head in his hands, and you understand why with that emotion. From the supporters of Karmelo Anthony, I don't know which family members are there behind him in court. Like, what is their emotion as all of this is going on?
It's just strict stoicism, Chris. No crying. I've seen, some men with their arms around what I presume to be their wives or girlfriends or maybe even daughters. There's a collection of them over there, maybe 15 to 20 of people on Karmelo's side, same amount over here on the Austin Metcalf side, but they're sitting there, no real tears, no one's really wiping any tears, but really just listening and taking it all in. Just stoic is the only way I can put it.
Now, when it comes to this final witness, we won't say their name because he's 17 years old. He is a student at Memorial High School, which is Austin Metcalf's high school. And in just kind of reading the notes of the day here, when it came to the defense questioning him, and he was a defense witness. So this is someone who knew Austin Metcalf, was on the team, and the defense is calling him. He had, I felt like, a little bit of a different perspective of what happened compared to some of the other students from this high school who have taken the stand.
Yeah, Chris, and it was interesting before he took the stand, or right when he took the stand, the defense attorney said that they had not talked before. It was like, sir, we haven't talked before, but just 2 minutes right now in the hallway. I thought that was interesting because if you're trying to, gain an edge or gain a leg up, why would you have a witness that you haven't done, witness preparation with? But anyway, they start talking. They're walking through the events. It takes them about 20 to 30 minutes to walk through the lead ups to everything and what this kid saw. And we heard this for the first time today. He said, Karmelo, the whole thing with the hand in the bag and touch me and see what happens. He said that Austin Metcalf tapped Karmelo on the shoulder, like as an annoyance, like, oh yeah, touch me and see what happens. And then he says something that we haven't heard yet. He said, Karmelo said, okay, well, hit me and see what happens, or punch me and see what happens, which we haven't heard that testimony from any student so far. So I'm just wondering, why it was just now said here. We've had over 10 of these student witnesses, and it was just said now during this witness. And then, as he was testifying, he was kind of disagreeing with some of the things that the defense attorney was throwing out. Obviously asking questions to kind of fit the narrative of the defense here with the self-defense claim. And one of their, narratives that they're throwing out is that, these Metcalf boys were some big boys, 6'1", 6'2", linebackers, over 200 pounds. And they started talking about the size comparison thing again, starting to go down that rabbit hole. And they were talking about Austin. Austin was 6'1", 213, according to the medical examiner. And his brother Hunter, the defense is like, well, Hunter was similar in size, trying to make them out to be, the big bullies and all. That's the narrative they're going down. And as the defense attorney is asking this, I can see Jeff Metcalf, the father, just shaking his head. shaking his head like these boys are not the same size. And the young man on the stand said, I wouldn't say that. And he actually said that Austin was substantially bigger than Hunter, which is very interesting. I mean, you're going down this narrative and then you have a witness on the stand that's supposed to be in support of your narrative and he's negating things that you're saying. I don't know how that looks in front of a jury. I imagine it's kind of damaging, maybe not extremely damaging, but it can't be, positive.
Yeah, and I saw like this is one of the notes that you put in there, just something along the line of you have like Hunter, who is apparently like, and this is before the incident happens. Hunter is apparently talking to Karmelo Anthony. Austin's tone was moderate, and I guess this student kind of doesn't remember saying this to a detective, but he had recalled at the time something along the lines of Austin said like, "You better move before I beat your." Another word for behind that we can't say here, which like that is different. That is different than what we heard from some of the other students as far as, if you're talking about the situation that Karmelo was in, that is certainly different than what we've heard from some of the state witnesses that came earlier in the week.
Yeah, and that's a win for the defense if the jury takes it on, because that shows that Austin Metcalf was equally an aggressor here. Because so far, through all the witnesses with the prosecution, everyone's, in this agreement that Karmelo was this aggressor. Karmelo was the instigator. Maybe that's a better word. And that Austin was just simply frustrated. But now we're hearing that Austin might have been saying some curse words back to Karmelo, maybe provoking each other, versus just being a one-sided thing. No matter whether Karmelo was randomly there, under the tent or not, I mean, we're still talking about the provocation between these two young men, and that's what matters here. What are the facts and the truth surrounding that?
When you look at the cross-examination, though, from the prosecution, and it seemed like that they were almost prepared for this witness and what they were going to say, because there was like one line, and I'm just kind of picking one out here, something along the lines of he wasn't from the shove that Austin Metcalf gave Karmelo Anthony, he was anticipating a shove back, something along that lines. Yeah. He was not anticipating Karmelo Anthony to pull a knife out and use that type of force. It just seems like the prosecution in some of these cases is prepared for what potentially could be some damaging testimony like what this student talked about.
Exactly. And that's to the point I was making earlier, Chris. When the defense brought this witness up there, he clarified to the court that they hadn't talked before. But then when the prosecution says, oh, yeah, we've talked for more than 2 minutes. And I was like, why would the prosecution be talking longer to a defense witness? But they were going down this path, and it seemed like the kid was under direct examination versus cross-examination when they came to talking to the prosecution, because the prosecutor was walking down kind of the same questions that he'd been asking their student witnesses when they got on the stand, just establishing the scene. And again, to the point, the line you just pointed out, he was just expecting this shove back. Not really concerned. He's kind of watching the races and everything going on, not expecting a knife to get pulled out and not even being concerned or scared of the situation. He didn't even feel like there was a fight that was going to happen. And he also ended by saying, he did not see Austin Metcalf as wanting to fight. He clearly said in his last answer by the prosecution under cross-examination that he felt Karmelo was in the wrong. And that's how the day ended. That was right before the adjournment and the recess right here, right now. So they got a few wins here, Chris, some small wins on the defensive side. I would have, liked to hear more challenges by the defense just to make it seem like it was a fair assessment of what was going on. But based on the witnesses called today, and again, very early, we don't know what next week is going to look like. They have an off day tomorrow on Sunday. We don't know if Karmelo will take the stand. We don't know if we'll have some stronger witnesses. But based off the witnesses today, it seems like they're off to a weaker start than expected.
Yeah.
All right, Fintellects, that's all we have for today for the murder trial, including Austin Metcalf and Karmelo Anthony. Don't forget to like this video as it helps us out the YouTube algorithm, and go ahead and drop a comment because I love to hear you guys' thoughts below, and I will respond to you. Don't forget to subscribe as well too, because we need more Fintellects like you to join the home team. But other than that, you guys, the Fiscal Intellect is out. Have a great one.